Welcome to After School with Mr. Van Huss, episode 23. Now, if you are a history person like I am, and you've been into any number of bookstores over the last few years, you've probably seen some of these books on the shelf. Hopefully you've read them because they're incredible. We had the first conspiracy, which was the secret plot to kill George Washington. We had the Lincoln conspiracy, secret plot to kill Abraham Lincoln, why it failed. And we had the most recent, the Nazi conspiracy, which was a secret plot to kill Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin. Now, all of these books were co-written by Brad Meltzer and Josh Mensch. Now, anybody that knows me, anybody that's been through my class knows what a huge fan of Brad Meltzer I am. These books have also made me a huge fan of Josh Mensch. And he is a great show producer and author and an even better guy. And that's who's going to be joining me today. So if you haven't read these books, go out and find them because they are incredible. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to Josh Mensch.
Well, welcome to After School with Mr. Van Huss. Today I'm here with Mr. Josh Mensch. Josh, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Drew. It's great to be here.
I was taping an intro for this just a minute ago and showing off these books, which I am a huge fan of.
Well, thank you.
I've been a Brad Meltzer fan for a long time and have he's a class act. He has stepped up and done a number of things for my classes and has just always been a great guy. And these books have made me a fan of yours too because they're incredible. And not just from a history standpoint, but anybody that likes like political thrillers or anything, they get better and better as they go along.
Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
So for anybody who may not be familiar with your work, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself and just kind of tell me a little bit about your career and what you've done.
Sure. Well, I was not originally an author. I used to work in television, nonfiction television, so documentaries, and I did a lot of sort of American history related subject matter, like for PBS and for the History Channel and places like that. And it was at the History Channel, working for the History Channel, that I met Brad Meltzer. We did a show together called Lost History that it only ran for one season, but it was a show we both really enjoyed working on. And I was a sort of behind the scenes producer and writer, and he was the on-air host, but we really collaborated on the whole thing. And that's how we got to know each other. And then we went our separate ways. He was already, of course, a very well-known author at that time. He was already writing his children's books, and he had written a bunch of his novels. He had written comic books. I mean, he does a lot of different things. And we, really enjoyed working on the show together. And I would write the stuff that he would say on camera for the most part. And so he got to know my writing style a bit. And then we went our separate ways, and I worked on some other TV shows, and he was doing a lot of other things. And then he kind of called me out of the blue a few years later and said, I actually remember it very well. He called and said, we hadn't talked to each other in a while. And, we set up a time to talk because we were both busy, and we finally get on the phone, and he says, Josh, I guarantee you this will be the strangest phone call you've received today. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And he said, have you ever thought about writing a book? And the honest answer was I hadn't thought about ever writing a book, at least not since I had been in college. I used to maybe think about it then, but I had been out in the workforce for several years. I had been doing different things and mostly working in film or television. So it really had not crossed my mind in many years. But he explained that he was about to start, he wanted to start writing some nonfiction, American history. He had written a lot of fiction, and he had this idea of like, why not try to write American history, but kind of in the style of one of his thrillers. But he wanted a collaborator who understood American history and knew how to do research and who could kind of help him crack the code of how to write nonfiction books that kind of read like thrillers. And he knew I knew how to do research about American history because of the projects we'd worked on together. So that's kind of how it started. And we formed this partnership, and neither one of us knew how it would go. He said, I write novels. I have no idea whether anyone's going to read this or going to want to read this. The whole thing could just crash and burn. And, if so, no harm, no foul, we'll go on our separate ways. But it turned out that the first book we did together, called The First Conspiracy, was quite successful. And his readers who had read his novels seemed to really enjoy this nonfiction as well. So the formula seemed to work, and the publisher that we worked with, great people at a place called Flatiron Books, they really wanted to keep doing more of them. And so that's how it all started.
That's great. Now, when you were working on Lost History, were you in with Brad on finding the 9/11 flag?
Yes, I was. That was our very first episode, and it was, one of our most exciting stories. And I was the producer behind the scenes on that episode. And so we were kind of in it together with, a team of other people as well, kind of learning this story, this crazy, wild story about the flag the famous flag that you see in this photograph at 9/11, and how that flag ended up going missing. And in our program, we tell the story of that flag and why it was important and how it was that it came to be missing. And the idea of that show was that then we would put it out to the public who watched the show, says, if you have any tips on where this flag might be, give us a call and we'll record all your tips and we'll see if anything comes of it. And we were working with a former FBI specialist in kind of lost artifacts and lost art. So he helped us set it all up. And sure enough, we got a lot of crazy tips. I mean, most of them were just people from all over the place with all kinds of crazy ideas. And so we had to weed through them. But one of them turned out to be very interesting. And right away, we could tell that there might be something there. And sure enough, it's a long story, but we ended up recovering this famous flag, this famous photograph from 9/11. And there was later a special. I unfortunately was unable to work on the special because I had moved on to a different project, but there was a sort of follow-up hour-long special that tracked the recovery of the flag and bringing it to the 9/11 museum. But yeah, it was a really fun story, and that's kind of partly how Brad and I bonded so much doing this amazing story together.
That's super cool. It's such a good story. So what influenced you to do what you do? What made you first want to get into television? Were you just always like a history person, or how'd you come into all that?
It's interesting. I wasn't so much a history person per se. I wasn't like just a history person, but I was very much a kind of liberal arts kind of person. I was at college, I was a philosophy major, which I can't say is something I use a whole lot today, but it is what it is. But I also read a lot of literature. I took history classes, book classes about religion, classes about politics, just kind of everything. I was one of those kind of everything people in college, and that ended up serving me well because I originally wanted to work in fiction film and be a kind of screenwriter or director. That kind of fizzled out, and I had some tough years not getting too far in that world. But then I switched to nonfiction and journalism, and everything kind of clicked. And so I guess my diverse interests served me well because I could do stories about lots of different things, and I felt that having that kind of just general curiosity and background in a lot of different areas, I don't know, it kind of helped me, I guess, or I hope it did. I don't know. But the American history thing sort of happened a little bit by accident. I happened to work on a series of shows that suited me and that were all about American history. I worked on a show called History Detectives for PBS, which isn't around anymore, but it was a great series. It was around for about 12 seasons and a wonderful show that it's a little bit similar to Lost History in that it was when people around the country find some strange artifact of American history, they call the history detectives and say, what is this thing that I just found in my attic or that I just picked up at a garage sale? Is it important? Is it valuable? And that show would then investigate and kind of tell the whole story of this object. So it was a way into American history. And I did some other history related shows. It kind of one led to the other because once it became a thing that, well, I've done a bunch of shows about American history, then someone was doing another show, they would want to hire someone who had done, so it kind of, and then that led directly to working with Brad and Brad then thinking of me to write these books. And he got me at just the right time because I just had my first son. My wife and I had our first child. And so TV hours can be really crazy. And I was, realizing how hard it is to be a parent and that you can't just be gone the whole time. And I was exhausted, as all new parents are. And so he caught me at that moment. And the idea of writing books felt a lot more kind of stable. And you know, and without the crazy hours of having to travel for TV shows and stuff. So my wife and I both were pleased at this, you know, at this change.
I understand that 100%. Before I got into teaching, right out of college, I worked in the music business and worked for the Country Music Association, and then
Oh,
did
great.
some like Christian book publishing for a few years and things like that. So I saw some of those crazy hours, and you know, teaching it can have its crazy hours too, but they're not quite as frequent as some of those other jobs were. So I totally understand that. It's kind of nice. Um, Before you got into your field of work, did you have any heroes growing up that you wanted to be like or anything like that?
Oh, wow, you know, that's an interesting question. I guess I'd have to think about that. I mean, I would say, if I'm being honest about it, I would say my early heroes were probably, you know, in the sort of creative fields. I was a musician, you know, growing up. I played in bands and stuff. I played the guitar and the bass guitar. So I worshiped, you know, rock stars and other musicians, songwriters. Still am a huge music fan. So those are some of my early heroes, you know, the Bob Dylans and I mean, I could name 100
You
musicians.
found his guitar too, didn't you? That was like the famous like plug-in guitar.
Yeah. That was for that show, History Detectives, that I
Yeah.
mentioned. This woman in New Jersey found a guitar, you know, had this guitar in her attic, and it turned out that it's the famous guitar that Bob Dylan plugged in at the Newport Folk Festival in 1963 that kind of changed music forever, because it kind of merged folk music and rock and roll, and made a lot of people angry at the time. So it's this kind of historically significant instrument. And and it was actually partly doing that story that sent me down a path of being a real Bob Dylan fan. I went and just kind of learned everything I could about him, and you know, still a big fan. And I was also, in addition to musicians, I read a lot of literature. So you know, I really got to know authors that I liked. And then I got into film, so I was interested in film directors. And then it was a little bit later, you know, when I got into journalism, that I think I had a slightly more realistic view of the world, and I started really admiring journalists and documentary makers that did great work, and I really, you know, respected and admired work that great filmmakers, journalists, storytellers, you know, people who are kind of in a similar field. I can't say that I had this one hero my whole life. I know some people do. I never really had that one hero, but.
All right. Well, what was high school like for you, and what further education did you do?
Well, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and I went to a public high school there, a very kind of typical working class, middle class public high school. You know, they had the football team and the kind of the usual American public high school stuff. It wasn't a fancy place, but it was a place that had some really great teachers. And you know, I had some teachers who were really great role models to me. I didn't think of that, to mention that. There wasn't one who was like, this is my mentor, but I had a couple of great English teachers who I really liked and who I learned a lot from. I had a great chemistry teacher, and thinking back now, they are some of the most impressive people and most important people that I ever knew, because I just have so much admiration for what teachers do. And the teachers who really put a lot of passion into it and really try to capture the students' imaginations and get them to work hard and to appreciate learning. I think there's nothing better. So, you know, sometimes you don't appreciate it until later, you know, when you're an adult and you look back and think, wow, that teacher was great. You know, at the time you're like, oh, they give me so much homework. But but looking back, those teachers in my, you know, humble public school in Buffalo, New York, were really some of the most important people to me.
Very cool. So you've got the ear of some teenagers here. What is one life lesson that you would pass on to the next generation that you've learned that you really appreciate?
What is one lesson? Well, um, let me think about that. I mean, I'm trying to think of something that's not just a corny thing that anyone would say, you know? I would say there's a kind of a mix of two things that are very different. One is to believe in yourself and pursue your passions, and pursue things in life that you really care about. But the second thing is to be humble about it, because I think you learn more by being humble and by seeing other people struggle and realizing how hard things can be, and appreciating any good luck that you have, and appreciating any support that you get from other people, because it's not easy. Life isn't always easy, and things don't always go your way. And so you really sometimes just have to dig down and work hard and not expect everything to come your way. And again, have a kind of humility about what you do, and about what, and especially about what other people are doing for you, and people who have, maybe not been so fortunate to just, I don't know. Again, this is a little corny, but to appreciate how hard life is, but still pursue what you want to pursue, and have some faith in yourself. It's a mix of things, I guess.
I think that's great advice, and it all sounds very, very good, and I can't wait to share it with my students. Last question. What's coming up next for the conspiracy series? Because I think I saw something on Brad Meltzer's social media the other day that was kind of pointing some clues as to what the next book was going to be about.
Yeah, so our books, each book is about a story from a different period in American history, and it's fun because I don't think too many authors are able to jump around the way we do. Our first book was a story from the Revolutionary War era. A lot of them, really all of them, are about, in some way or another, about assassination plots, which are always kind of fun and exciting, but are also a chance to just open up and tell the story of the history at that time. So the first one was about an assassination plot against George Washington right during the Revolutionary War as it was beginning. The second one was a kind of a Civil War era book about an early assassination plot to kill Abraham Lincoln. Some white supremacists in Baltimore, Maryland, wanted to kill him on the way to his inauguration because they didn't want an abolitionist in the White House. They wanted to maintain slavery, and so they thought the best way to maintain it would be to assassinate this new president who they thought was, opposed to slavery. The third one was a World War II book, also about a Nazi assassination plot to potentially assassinate the three big Allied leaders, Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin, when they were all together for a summit meeting in Tehran. And our next book, I don't want to give away too much, but it's from the JFK era, the early 60s, and it's quite a little known story about John F. Kennedy. And so it opens up that whole kind of Kennedy era, and it's a chance to dive in and explore that period of American history.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to it. A couple of years ago, I guess it was about 2018 or so, I pestered Brad enough, and I've never met Brad in person. We've never met in person. I hope to meet both of you guys one day and just shake both your hands and thank you for doing things for my classes and stuff. But I bugged him enough a few years ago to FaceTime with a bunch of my students and talk about the Kennedy assassination one afternoon. And we kept about 60 kids after school one day just to talk to Brad Meltzer and hear stories about the Kennedy assassination. So when I saw that the next book was going to be in that era, I was super excited. I can't wait to see it. So I'm sure it's going to be great.
Good. Yeah, well, it's we're exploring some territory that not too many people know about. It's not about, the thing that a million books have already been written about, and we all know what that is. It's a little different, and I think it'll be interesting for anyone, not just people interested in that era, but anyone who's interested in a good story and interested in American history. So
I'm sure it's going to be amazing. Josh, I can't thank you enough for sitting down and talking with me today. I love your advice. I love hearing your stories, and I'm going to be looking forward to anything you do here in the future.
Well, I really appreciate that. Good luck with your podcast or YouTube show, whatever we're calling it these days.
I think it changes by the day,
Exactly. But good luck to all your students. And it was really great to talk to you.
Thank you very much, and you too, and thank you for staying after school with Mr. Van Huss.
You got it.